Okay, people are coming in, so all yours.
I'm just watching the numbers. So people can hear me now?
They can hear you, they can see us staring at each other.
I'm just watching the numbers climb on the screen, that's all. Oh, here she comes. Good afternoon, Councilwoman. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you as well. We just opened up the webinar. We're going to give a couple minutes to make sure everybody is getting in. I understand you've had a hectic schedule already this morning.
Just the new way it is. But no, it's good. We're happy to be here.
Oh, I love your slides.
Thank you.
Nice color scheme. So Hallie, I think we should wait about 2 more minutes and then we can get started. I have some very brief kind of housekeeping remarks and then we'll introduce our guest.
Sure. And just some brief comments for everyone that's already on. You should be able to see the PowerPoint slides, a bit quite large. If you want to see whoever's speaking in a larger fashion, then you would just tap on, I guess, the video stream, the smaller square that's on your screen, and it will make the videos larger. And if you tap back on the PowerPoint, it'll make the PowerPoint larger. So whichever way you'd like to view this.
So Hallie, I'm gonna start in 1 minute. Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome CNHED members to 2021. This is our first monthly membership meeting for the year. And I do have a couple just housekeeping comments. First, I just have to look back over the last year and thank and praise all of you for everything that you did to help the District of Columbia through the year that we experienced and endured last year. We thanked you at the end of the year, but frankly, it was still all a blur. And over the holidays, we spent some time cataloging the work of the members and the impacts and interventions that you provided. And we kind of puffed up even more with pride and gratitude for what you did. So I just want to say thanks again for everything in 2020. You were resilient and relevant to the district's efforts to first provide safety for our vulnerable populations and then help with recovery efforts as well. I also just want to quickly introduce CNHED's newest member, Raina Whitted, who is here. Raina is our new communications and program coordinator. And I introduce her because she will be doing a lot of interaction with you, with information services and convening assistance and so forth. So I want to publicly welcome Raina. And then the last thing before I introduce our guest is I just want us to have a moment of remembrance for a dear friend that we lost this week. Margaret Singleton, who was with the Chamber of Commerce for many years, passed away this past week. And Margaret was a good friend of CNHED's. She served on our Small Business Policy Committee. She served on our DC Community Anchor Partnership Advisory Board. And this loss impacts us in a dual way because her son works for one of our prominent members, WACIF, the Washington Area Community Investment Fund. And so I just want a quick moment of remembrance for Margaret. Margaret was the person inside the chamber who championed CNHED winning the Nonprofit of the Year award last year from the Chamber of Commerce. Several of our members nominated us, but Margaret championed it on the inside. And so now I am really pleased and excited to be introducing our guest speaker, Councilwoman Pinto, won a special election. Councilwoman, please correct me if I get the months wrong. Last year was a blur, but I think it was June, if I recall.
That's right.
And there's so much different kind of about this moment. So CNHED members, you know that generally every election cycle, our first month of the year, we usually have a meet and greet with new council members. And we do have 2 other council members, and we will meet and greet them at some point. But it's fair to call Councilwoman Pinto the senior member of the new council members because she came on in June in a special election. And we're really excited. I have kind of watched the inner machinations of the council this last year and through the election cycle. And Councilwoman Pinto has landed in some very prominent committees. She is going to be nexused into your work and the work that we care about in a number of ways. So I'm delighted that she was able to accept our invitation. She's going to make a presentation that she's prepared. I'm sure just kind of overarching kind of talking points and priorities. I have some questions that I may use, but I want to encourage you to put questions in the chat after her presentation. I'm sure she and I would prefer your questions to mine because you matter most. But we have some just in case we need to keep the ball bouncing. So let me introduce our guest speaker. Brooke Pinto was sworn in as Ward 2's council member on June 27th, 2020, after winning the special election to fill the vacant seat. She is the first woman to hold this seat and the youngest DC council member in history. She previously served in the Office of the Attorney General as a tax attorney, where she represented the Office of Tax and Revenue as her client. She then served as Assistant Attorney General for Policy and Legislative Affairs. She earned her BS from Cornell and also a graduate degree from Georgetown Law. She became in Ward 2 and DC community as a law student through her work with the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, actually one of our members. And so with that, and I'm sure that Councilwoman Pinto will tell you anything else that she wants you to know that she thinks is relevant, but it is my absolute a pleasure to introduce to you Ward 2 Councilwoman Brooke Pinto. Councilwoman?
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for that great introduction. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today who do such wonderful work in the district. As Mr. Glaude mentioned, I am Brooke Pinto. I'm the council member representing Ward 2 on the DC Council, and I'm really pleased to join you all for your January board meeting and fireside chat. I know I speak for all of us that we're looking forward to having these types of chats be actually by a fireside, but this Zoom simulation will do for now. I know that there is a lot to discuss around the future of affordable housing and the ways in which we can build a stronger and more robust, equitable local economy. But before to begin, I want to thank your president and CEO, again, Mr. Steve Glaude, and the entire CNHED community for extending this invitation to me. I am most looking forward to speaking with you all, not only because it presents me the opportunity to share a little bit more about my background and priorities on the council, but more importantly, because it presents me the opportunity to learn more deeply about the actions that you are all taking in specific areas critical to the growth and success of so many of our neighborhoods and the entire city. The Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development is known throughout our city as an incredibly strong advocate for strengthening our communities and ensuring that the district is a place where so many can call home. So thank you for your continuing ability to be such an effective resource and partner for the council. And for these reasons and many more, I am thrilled to be with you today. So if we can turn to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more about my background and professional work experiences and how I was led to run for office here, the DC Council. I went to school for undergrad at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and I went to what was called the Hotel School, which is really a hospitality program grounded in business. And I think that experience stays with me most every day because it's really about customer service and about grounding in the practical effects of how each of us play such an integral role in the business community. And through those experiences, I was very interested in senior living communities, which is primarily where I worked throughout college, and thought that I was most interested in becoming a healthcare lawyer. And so that's why I went to Georgetown Law School and focused on healthcare law initially when I worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Blumenthal, who's a Democratic senator from the state of Connecticut. And I was his health and aging fellow. And so I worked primarily on issues that affected healthcare, particularly women's healthcare and senior issues. And while I was inspired by that work, it was very, it was taken from a bird's eye view perspective. And I was really much more interested in the direct services impact that I could have. And one of the best parts about Georgetown Law is not only was it so close to the Capitol and Supreme Court, and you could walk down the street to hear an argument, but more importantly, it was centered in the District of Columbia local community. And it was through that exposure that I was able to work with the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless, as Steve mentioned, and really get a better sense of what some of the needs of our local DC residents were. I would take residents to testify at council hearings and really ensure that their viewpoints were heard throughout the process. I specialized in tax law and then went to the US Court of Federal Claims, where I focused on tax cases, and then went to the DC Attorney General's office, working for Carl Racine, first on tax litigation matters. And I was really excited to go to the Attorney General's office initially because of the unique ability that they serve as both a prosecutor's office and a defense office, but most importantly, that they were serving District of Columbia residents. After doing that, I wanted to expand my horizon and portfolio of the types of issues that I was working on, and was thrilled to become the Assistant Attorney General for Policy and Legislative Affairs. And in that role, I worked very closely with the DC Council and with stakeholders across the city on tenant protections and privacy and small business issues and cannabis, and really got a better sense of the entire legislative process that is so unique here in DC, but also of the real need for collaborative and creative legislators. It was never just enough to say, okay, we should encourage somebody to vote for or against something. It's really crucial that our lawmakers be part of that creative legislative process, which was really inspiring to me. I also had the opportunity to represent the District of Columbia at conferences around the country for the National Attorneys General Association and the Western Conference of Attorneys General and the Democratic Association of Attorneys General. And that exposure made me so prideful to be from the District of Columbia and represent the unique needs of our jurisdiction. And something that I found so surprising everywhere I went is how little education there was around our need for statehood. I would speak to attorneys general and US senators across the country who truly had no idea the injustices district residents faced on a daily basis due to the fact that we don't have statehood. And so I would start every speech with a discussion on statehood and its importance. And that experience stays with me to this day as we fight for statehood to ensure that we are educating our partners across the country on why it is so important. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So affordable housing and homelessness. Increasing our affordable housing stock is one of my top priorities. I'm so thrilled to have the opportunity to serve on the housing committee this council period. And as many of you know, and all of you know probably, that increasing our affordable housing stock is so critical to ensuring that the district remains a diverse and vibrant place to live, work, and play. And during the district's budget votes last summer, as Steve mentioned, I won a special election and was sworn in on Saturday, June 27th. And my first day of work was Monday, June 29th, was our council budget meeting to go over the budget. So it was a great time to start and get in there. And I was thrilled to be able to vote for enhancements to the DC low-income housing tax credit to ensure that it's more accessible to developers, and voted to increase the Housing Production Trust Fund. I also know that there are multitude of programs available to district developers, and there is a strong need for increased coordination and collaboration among our district agencies. And that's something that we are working on improving this council period to ensure that we can provide the adequate oversight and fund a position in DEMPED that could focus solely on providing the support to developers of affordable housing. I'm also very interested in encouraging the conversion of commercial office space to affordable and mixed use residential space. As we continue to adjust to the effects of the pandemic, one of the issues that has been very clear is that so many people are working from home. And as a result, we've seen a huge vacancy leap in our office market space downtown. And so we're working with commercial property owners and would love to engage more actively with the members of CNHED to develop programs to incentivize the conversion from vacant, particular commercial office space into residential and mixed use space. And we know that in doing those conversions, particularly if the district were to provide an incentive to do so, it would be critically important to us to ensure that a portion of those conversions were focused on affordable housing units. So while vacancies in the commercial office space are a current challenge, we see this as an opportunity to creatively address this need and add affordable housing, whether that be through the incentive I mentioned or through other structures within the tax code. Second, I'd like to talk about addressing homelessness and assisting our neighbors experiencing homelessness. So while homelessness impacts the District of Columbia in many of the same ways that it impacts other major cities around the world, the homelessness epidemic presents unique challenges for our city during this global health pandemic and has especially impacted Ward 2, where we see the highest rates. Understandably, businesses and residents are voicing their concerns about the health and safety of those living in the encampments and that of other permanent residents in the surrounding areas. With homelessness increasing and becoming more visible, there is increasing awareness of the need to move more people into housing and to provide mental health supports for our neighbors experiencing homelessness. It is a complicated problem that cannot be solved with a one-size-fits-all solution. And my team and I continue to work with the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services and the Department of Human Services to coordinate our efforts to move more residents into housing. In the FY21 budget, I also supported increases for permanent supportive housing vouchers. And as noted, we continue to work actively with DHS and DMHHS to ensure that those resources are leveraged quickly and effectively. Third, I want to talk about building a strong and vibrant local economy. Ward 2 is the economic engine of our city and our region, and it is critically important that we help our businesses remain open and get our employees back to work safely. Many of you may have seen much of the plywood has started to come down around downtown, which is really exciting to let DC residents and visitors know that DC is open for business. It's incredibly important that people still practice safety measures and wear their masks and stay distant, but really important that we support our local businesses during this year as we navigate this recovery. And to help minimize the effects of the closures on our local economy, I was proud to join my colleague, Councilmember Kenny McDuffie, who's the chair of our Business and Economic Development Committee, which I'm also proud to serve on this year, in co-sponsoring legislation that extends the lifetime of streeteries through December of 2021. And we knew that this was really important to give businesses and restaurants assurance that it was a worthwhile investment to purchase this outdoor furniture, knowing that they could utilize the spaces throughout the year. Many of you may have seen the mayor's announcement that she's hoping to extend those as well during the spring and summer months in years to come. I was also proud to support various efforts to provide restaurants with the resources they needed to winterize their establishments and make outdoor dining a viable option for businesses and patrons. We voted to extend our unemployment benefits for district workers whose jobs may have in some way been adversely affected by the pandemic. And while we would like to get everyone back to work, we must continue to prioritize public health and in turn find other innovative ways to boost our local economy. This year, as a member of the Council's Business and Economic Development Committee, I'll be working to identify ways to help our businesses recover and thrive during and after the pandemic. And we know that that is likely going to look different for many of our local businesses. I will be placing a strong emphasis on our small, local, and women and minority-owned businesses in particular. I'll also be serving this year as a member of the special COVID-19 Recovery Committee. And this special committee is tasked with studying the effects of the pandemic on our city and developing recommendations to guide the district government's recovery efforts moving forward. And that's another place that I would love your engagement on as we come up with solutions to a problem that we've never quite faced before. So a little bit more about supporting women and minority-owned businesses. We understand that the pandemic laid bare many of our pre-existing inequalities that have faced women and minority-owned businesses for centuries. And I've joined my colleagues to push forward legislation that makes the district's contract and procurement process more equitable for women and minority-owned businesses. And this legislation prevents larger businesses and businesses from outside of the District of Columbia from receiving benefits that are intended to help our small local businesses here in DC. So we can go to the next slide. Is the next slide our last slide? I spoke a little bit about this already, but I thank you again for having me. I hope that you were able to learn a little bit more about my background and goals for the council. And I'm really excited to continue working hard and work with each of you over the next 4 years on these goals. But more importantly, I'm looking forward to our conversation so I can hear directly from you about ideas you may have or questions or thoughts you may have as we go forward. So thank you.
Councilwoman, thank you so much. My first reaction as I watched you lay out your areas of focus was, are you sure you just joined us in June? Because I think that you kind of wrapped your head and your arms around. As I was looking at the list, I thought, you know, if this were your second week on the job and we were briefing you about what's important to us, the list would look very similar to what you outlined. So I just want to validate what you're seeing as challenges and priorities are very consistent with the work that our members do and the priorities that we identify and so forth. And my first question for you was going to be, but I think you kind of answered it in your opening, which was, you know, what made you decide to run for office? And the reason is that because it was such an unusual campaign period, that the normal means by which we get to know these things about candidate, they just weren't there. It wasn't, you know what I mean? It wasn't the normal articles in the Washington Post every 3 days and, you know, lots of community forums and so forth and so forth. So I don't know if you want to add more to that. When I look at your background and realizes your stations along the way, they conclusively lead to higher service in this way. But I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all.
Sure. Well, I think, you know, part of what I talked about a couple minutes ago around the being part of the creative solution, part of my role was community facing and meeting with groups who had asks for the Attorney General's office and legislative asks primarily. And I always felt so frustrated that I couldn't do more in those meetings. And the General Racine was incredibly forward-thinking and collaborative and thoughtful in his approach to which legislative measures he pushed forward. But there are so many groups out there who are committing their time and resources, many times in addition to their regular day jobs, to try to solve the challenges that the District of Columbia faces. And I always have wanted to do more for them. I will say, in terms of timeline, I probably shouldn't say this, but here we are. I loved my job. I didn't really picture leaving my job. I felt like I was making an impact on our city. I loved my team. And the previous council member had resigned, and there were a number of people who were running in the race. And a week later, he announced he was running again for the same seat. And I kind of just couldn't believe it. And so I quit my job the next week and got in the race. So it certainly, while I had been working on these issues and contemplating how I could be more effective, it wasn't really a part of a long-term plan to run for this seat. But I'm so glad I did. About 1 to 2 weeks after I got in the race, COVID-19 materialized and everything went remote, which allowed me to have a lot of conversations over the phone with residents, and also a lot of Zoom meetings. All of our debates were over Zoom, except for one, I think the week after I got in the race. And all of our community forums were all over Zoom, and interviews, and everything was over Zoom, which, you know, I wish that we could have been in person, but in many ways, cutting down on that transit time allowed me to meet with so many thousands of people throughout the spring that I may not have been able to meet all of them at once. So it was certainly a fast kind of thing, but really thrilled I did it.
One offering I want to make, you mentioned putting a focus on the conversion of retail space to mixed use. And gosh, it feels like maybe 2 years ago, CNHED managed a task force to look at examining the conversion of retail space to housing. It wasn't mixed use, but there may be some things in that report that you might find helpful. I'll make sure that we send that report to you for some of the findings. There were some definitive challenges that came out of that analysis, and they may have been because it wasn't mixed use. Some of the challenges that emerged may have been because it was just for residential, and some of those challenges may not be as pertinent given the focus on mixed use, but I'll make sure that we get you that information. I have one question, and I'm not sure about the question, but I'm gonna ask it because I may have missed what teed this up, but what is the purview of the Committee on Housing and Executive Administration, and what will executive administration entail? And I want to just qualify if the asker means more than just the typical oversight that the committees provide on the executive branch. Or Councilwoman, does that resonate with you as okay?
Yeah, I think I can elaborate on that. And thank you so much, Steve, for offering to send that report. That would be fantastic. We'd love to see that and see if there are crossovers. One thing I'll just add that makes this time a little bit distinct is that it may be already in the best interest of some property owners to engage in that conversion because the vacancy rates are so high. And so just to be very transparent with all of you, we want to make sure that the incentive structure is appropriate, that we're not incentivizing behavior of something that was already going to happen by the marketplace. So that's one of the key outcomes that we're looking to determine by reviewing that study and others. So thank you. So the Housing and Executive Committee, that is really more of a function of some of the committees shifted as they do every council period. And so Brandon Todd used to chair the Committee on Government Operations, and because he left, there was a shift. And so Robert White is now chairing the Committee on Government Operations and Facilities and Procurement, which is already going to be kind of a large committee. And so some of the items under some of the agencies under the executive and executive oversight moved into Anita Bond's committee under the Housing Committee. And so that just kind of became combined. So that's the real change there, why it seems like a stark change in title, but really in function was just more to make sure everybody has an appropriate workload.
Okay. Another question, what are your thoughts about the need for increasing funding for new units of affordable housing? This is going to sound like a plant, but I promise you it's not. Although not surprising, especially capital dollars for the Housing Production Trust Fund and the local rent supplement program. And Councilwoman, just to ground this, before my time, and certainly before your time, CNHED actually created the Housing Production Trust Fund through a series of policy and administrative engagements. Years later, also created the local rent supplement program. So these are obviously near and dear to our leaders and members, and they have proven to be a viable platform for advancing both the council and the mayor's affordable housing interests and goals.
And Steve, I'm sorry, an email was going off as you were saying the first part of the question. You're saying, are you supportive of increasing funding for the?
Yes, essentially, yes.
So in short, absolutely. I mentioned that my first day on the job was the budget meeting. And so something that my team and I were very aware of was that in order to make an impact, we had to be very strategic in our approach. We couldn't ask for everything under the sun. And so what we did was we identified some Ward 2 priorities and then worked within the agencies to have them find that money within their budget to see if they could accomplish those priorities. And then we added up what all that money would be and asked that it be applied to the Housing Production Trust Fund. And then found other innovative ways to fund additional permanent supportive housing vouchers, which I mentioned, like repealing the qualified high technology tax credit under the condition that 5 million of that went to permanent supportive housing. So we are very supportive. We continue to push for this during the mayor's budget as well as through the council's budget. We think it's one of the most important things that we can do to increase the housing stock. I will add, we're also very concerned about the condition of much of our public housing and ensuring that there's adequate funding to engage in public housing repairs so that people are truly living in habitable housing.
Mm-hmm. One of the, and this is my description, but one of the more convoluted pursuits that the district has been involved with, and we as an advocate community have been involved with over the last couple of years, has been rent control. And I don't know if you've had a chance to wrap your head and mind around where everything is, but one of the questions is, have you formulated any plans to improve DC's rent control laws?
So yes, I think that the rent control laws clearly need updating. This is something that my team and I were working on last fall, and one of the additional main reasons why we're so thrilled to have a chance to serve on the housing committee so that we can shape this more acutely. And so some of the first places that we're starting with are around voluntary agreements. You may know that there was a 2-year moratorium on voluntary agreements passed at the end of the council period. We're looking to come up with a more specific, nuanced prevention so that the problematic voluntary agreements are prohibited, whereas the contractual ones not abusing the privilege can continue. And that's something we're working on. We're also working on ensuring that tenants are adequately represented and can't be taken advantage of by their landlords. Working on increasing the amount of buildings that are subject to rent control. I will say in doing that, we are aware of the unique challenges that small landlords face and don't think it's appropriate to be applying the same standard across the board. And so those are probably the first three issues that we're aiming to target within the rent control space and market, understanding that over the next year or two, there's much more to do, but trying to make sure that each of those three is accomplished so that we can move on to the next phase.
Great. One of the issues that we are all one of the issues that COVID has made us all too painfully aware of is the digital divide. Everybody has their own lens of how isolation because of quarantine and other things have illuminated as well as exacerbated the digital divide. And one of the questions here, comment questions, is from Yvette with Bite Back, citing that funding for digital inclusion has decreased, I think, in maybe the last budget cycle. And she simply asked, would you be willing to talk with Bite Back and CNHED to figure out how we try to ensure, protect, advance digital inclusion as we go forward?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I am similarly very concerned about this and how it has increased the learning loss that a lot of our students have suffered from over the course of this year engaging in distance learning. I was very supportive of the mayor's effort to add $3 million to purchase additional iPads and laptops and hotspots, and have been working closely with DCPS to ensure that all of our students are delivered a device. To this day, DCPS does have some extra devices. And so if anybody on this call hears from a family who is in need of one of those devices, please let our office know and we can help coordinate that. But over the longer term, I would love to speak with you all about how we can improve those issues. Another thing we're looking at now is how we can increase programming over the summer to ensure that students who may not have as much access both to devices or internet or a safe space to learn from still can continue their learning into the summer months and make up for some of what was lost over the course of the year. A lot of the studies, I'll just say lastly, a lot of the studies about learning loss are so fascinating, which I guess is intuitive, that the learning loss our students have suffered in math and sciences is far greater than what they've suffered in English and reading. And it makes sense that a lot of parents will say, okay, we'll read this book or, think about this and we can talk about it, but fewer parents and families are comfortable teaching math and sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, the students are really suffering. And so as we think about decreasing the digital divide and increasing programming, I think it's really important that we focus on math and sciences, especially to catch our kids up to where they need to be.
So one thing I just have to pause and say is, one, Councilwoman, you're doing great. One thing I realized from the volume of questions that are coming are two things. One, people were anxious to engage you. I know what our webinar schematics are, and usually I have to beg in the chat for more questions, and I'm like 17 questions backed up. So let me say to the audience, if I'm not getting to your question, I'm not intentionally dodging you. I'm just managing a fast moving field. And so I think it's a combination of, Councilwoman, people are anxious to get to know you and hear from you. I think that, folks have had an opportunity to have the holidays kind of refocus them on issues and needs and challenges. My biggest challenge right now is keeping over this flurry of questions. One question was about looking at, as there are shifts in the hotel market, hotel conversions, and particularly a request around, would the city be willing to look at conversions that could be used for permanent supportive housing? I'm assuming it's coming from one of our our homeless advocates, but is that an issue that has popped up on y'all's radar screen?
Yes, I think it's incredibly important, both for the short term and long term. I think as we're in the short term, it's really important that we make use of a lot of the vacant rooms that many of our hotels are experiencing. And both, it's important to move people into housing, but I think it can keep the hotel alive, make sure that fewer workers are laid off, and keep the operation running. And so I absolutely support it in the short term. In the long term, I think that it's a really great option to have the city purchase a hotel and use it for that purpose, so long as we have the adequate supports we need. Something that I think we really need to and have begun to start shifting to as a city is not putting all folks on vouchers in one property or in one area of the city. And it's really important that we have mixed income developments, that we have mixed income areas of the city so that things don't get pushed to one building or one neighborhood. And that would be my primary concern with using a hotel for this purpose. But I think we have a need, we have vacant rooms, and it's a pretty sensible matchup.
There was another question in your presentation. You mentioned innovative ways to address homelessness, and obviously the blatant obvious way is more housing, which we know that the council and the mayor and everyone is aware of and committed to. But are there other innovations that that you are examining or looking at or coalescing with your colleagues around?
Sure. So I think the number one thing that we are doing and need to be doing a better job at the council is the collaboration between all the various groups who are working on these issues. And so we have DHS working hard on this. We have the development of additional stock, as you mentioned. We have our encampments coordinator, but then we also have our outreach folks at DBH who are assisting with mental health care needs. And all of those groups just mentioned aren't always using the same data or talking to one another in the same way. And I think that that's a key function of the council, to bring those groups together and make sure we're all operating off of the same information first and then addressing the problem collectively. And so we have been meeting with those groups multiple times a month to make sure that that data is being shared and that people aren't getting left behind or falling through the cracks if one outcome or option is not appropriate for their needs. So that's the first thing that we're focusing on this year. The other thing that we're looking at is, as the discussion has been around the last 6 months about the need to have reforms, not just in our criminal justice system, but in our policing efforts, to build up our capacity for community engagement, to build community trust. And so there's been a lot of wonderful work by a lot of our outreach partners like Miriam's Kitchen and Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless that build relationships with our neighbors experiencing homelessness and help guide them to the right resource and avenue that they may need. But I think those programs need more funding and more support so that they can really have a more ubiquitous presence in these neighborhoods. And if somebody is not willing to move into permanent supportive housing voucher, really determine why that is and help that person through what may be the best option for them.
One thing I would like you to be aware of is that from the provider side, we've seen that same pain point. And one of the things we have been, and it's been impacted by, frankly, leadership passing at DCHFA and some other transitional. But one of the things we've been urging is that those three agencies, DHCD, the Housing Authority, and the Housing Finance Agency, also on a maybe 2 or 3 times a year, 3 times a year, preferably, actually meet with the provider community, because just as you all from a governmental and investment side want to see that coordination and collaboration, our members are having to navigate those landscapes for funding, project manning, voucher allocation, and so much more. And we are still pushing for that. So I will personally keep you informed of how those efforts go, because I think if you all can foster it from the policy and the governmental side, but we're also syncing coordination from the provider and implementation side. I think that when in the middle becomes much more realizable. So I will keep you apprised of our efforts along those lines.
That sounds great. It's such an important point. It's such an important point. So we'd love to work with you on
Let's
that.
see. So I've got questions coming up. Somebody's asking about the eviction crisis, and it's obviously big and impacting every aspect of our society. The council from a legislative and policy point of view, the administration from a management point of view, and obviously the provider community from an operational sense. What are your thoughts about where we are with the eviction crisis?
Well, I think that this year has taught us all many things, but one of the things is that many people who had not been reliant on government services found themselves in need of government services, whether that be unemployment benefits or protection to maintain their housing. And it would be the absolute worst case scenario if we had an entire generation and major pockets of our entire city unable to pay their rent and evicted. And so I think it's a really important protection to provide. Thrilled to see President Biden agrees and is extending the eviction moratorium at the national level as well. As we get through this crisis and hopefully get more people back to work, I think that the most effective tool is to expand our emergency rental assistance program so that we can empower our renters to pay their rent, so that the landlords can be paid and the lenders can be paid back and the entire marketplace can start moving again. I think making a long-term complete cut or ban can have those unintended ripple effect consequences. And so we're now trying to find additional funding to expand our ERAP program so that what we're trying to prevent doesn't happen, that people don't get evicted, but that the entire marketplace can keep moving again. And so that's how I'm thinking about it over the short term and then over the medium term.
Okay, let me just see if I can catch up. Oh, here's one question. This is a bit of a hot seat question, but I know you're built to handle it. Someone asked, what are your views about expanding affordable housing in your ward, in Ward 2?
Oh, I don't think that's a hot seat question. I think it's really important, and I'm very supportive of it. I think, as I was talking about earlier, with the need to have affordable housing throughout the city, I think Ward 2 is a fantastic place to have more affordable housing. We're very lucky to have great transportation options and points, a lot of grocery stores, a lot of other businesses and restaurants that would also benefit from more residents living downtown and throughout the ward. So I think it's not only good for the economy, but I also think it's good for our residents, both residents who are living in affordable units and residents who are paying marketplace to live in mixed income environments. I think lifts the entire city up, and Ward 2 has an added responsibility to do that, and I am very supportive of that.
Another participant asked about the removal of encampments recently. And I remember from my days in the mayor's office that there were some Ward 2 specific encampment places and protocols that we engaged in your ward, but of course it's also a citywide issue. What is your view of how the city is handling it and where we might need to go to improve things?
So, as I mentioned, I think in my remarks, Ward 2 sees the highest rates of individuals experiencing homelessness and encampments. And that is due to a number of factors. But one of them that's been identified to us, which makes a lot of sense, is that people feel safe here. They feel safe that their tent is not going to be kicked over or demolished. And that's a beautiful thing. We continue to think that it is most safe for everyone involved for people to live in permanent housing. That is what we will continue to fund. That is what we will continue to push for. Those are the individuals we will continue to prioritize to ensure that they are offered these vouchers whenever possible. And that's a big part of our coordination and partnership with DHS and DMHHS. As you know, the CDC has a prohibition during COVID of clearing encampments. And it's kind of an impossible situation for many folks who are told it's not safe to live in a shelter because people are too close to one another. So then they move to the street, and there's a prohibition on guidance that says do not clear them right now. So the Department of Health and DHS and DMHHS are all navigating this to make sure that our housed residents also have, a clear sidewalk and place to path, and that there are other really intense health issues like leakage or rodents, that's taken care of and that's removed. But in this intermediate period, they are not engaging in clearings of encampments. And so it's been a big challenge. It's one of the most prevalent concerns I hear from neighbors around Ward 2 is their concern and their desire for a change. And so it's one of those issues that for the time being, we're trying to keep everybody safe. COVID-19 is the first priority to limit the spread, get this population vaccinated, ensure that they have the adequate PPE they need, provide additional housing vouchers when available. And then after we get through COVID, then I think the efforts will be able to increase a little bit with the options we're providing people without the danger of being so close to one another.
Thank you. I know this is kind of a floating crap game question, but is the council developing a clear sense on how COVID is going to affect the upcoming budget?
So yes and no. We continue to receive.
That's why I said floating.
Yeah, that's right. You know the drill. You've been there. We continue to receive updated revenue estimates from Chief Financial Officer, and that informs a lot of our approach going forward, because what continues to build is the need for additional funding. But what does not continue to build is the revenue stream coming into the district to do so. And so we've been monitoring that closely, a drop in sales tax, of course, a drop in income taxes, real estate taxes been more consistent. And so we're watching those metrics closely to determine how much of a hole we're going to need to fill, not just to pay to keep the city functioning as is, but then to pay for these additional programs that are so needed just to get us through this. I think, just to be perfectly candid, it's not going to be feasible without a lot more money from the federal government. And it's one of the things I'm most grateful for, that it seems that the Biden administration understands. We have already received an additional amount of money, about $200 million will go towards rental support, more to go towards our education efforts and our vaccination efforts. And so that will help a lot, but we need more from them to really plug that hole and to ensure that we can pay for these emergency measures that we need. I am hopeful that President Biden gets it, and that the mayor's office has been consistent and effective in their advocacy to make that case. And so once that happens, we'll certainly feel much more comforted. The council will be receiving the mayor's version of the budget shortly, in about a month and a half. And so we will be able to go from there with what other holes we need to plug.
This is a kind of a combination question, insight, thought. As we were after you accepted, and I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about your existence over these last 6-7 months. I thought about your commercial corridors. CNHED works with commercial corridors throughout the city. And, we have a focus on what I would probably describe as somewhere between, challenging and vulnerable commercial corridors like Rhode Island Avenue and Lower Georgia Avenue and some of the other ones. What has been your observation of impact with your Ward 2 commercial corridors, most notably Georgetown? I've just always wondered, did they find themselves in the exact same boat as some of the less affluent commercial corridors? And what has been your observation and ways to try to help in that regard?
Mhm. We've been absolutely crushed. And Georgetown is no different. It's really awful to see what's happened. A lot of the office market has fled, it's completely vacant. Dozens of retail, restaurant, other stores in all categories have closed down with no plans to reopen. So it's really quiet in a lot of those areas, which is incredibly concerning. And I think, you know, we're not the only ward who's suffered from it, but because of the high density of local businesses that are in Ward 2, we see the impacts on a daily basis with boarded up stores and inability to pay rent on the commercial side as well. And so one of the things we're looking at is similar to how we have moratorium on residential evictions, working with our property owners and landlords to figure out how they can help our commercial tenants get through this time, because it's not going to be good for anybody if more and more of them are unable to pay their rent and are kicked out of their spaces. And so we're also sympathetic to the fact that some of those property owners, that may be the only property they have and their only source of income. And so we're working with both parties to encourage them to come up with an arrangement on a case-by-case basis that allows for delayed payment or lowered interest rate payment or a additional loan from some of our local banking partners to get them through this time so that they can pay their rent and then continuing to provide their business and provide such great service to the community. It's what makes our community so special, is all these local shops.
Okay, we are just about out of time. Councilwoman, I really want to thank you for making yourself available to us. I think this is a great way to kick off the year, to get insights from some of the new leadership that's on the council. And I just have to say this. So when we were teeing up this invitation, a number of things dawned on me. It dawned on me that as I would traditionally have done right after someone was elected, I would reach out and ask for just a moment to connect personally and to introduce myself to the councilwoman and the organization. And then, you know, we had to get through the winter and it didn't happen. So as we were making this request, I realized, I said, oh my God, I'm getting ready to ask her to come and speak, but I haven't done my courtesy, you know, just let me introduce myself in the organization. And so I ended up having to do something that just goes against all my rules, which is to put both requests in one email. So we sent the email, we got the response from the councilwoman and her team. And I said, ooh, I still got to follow up and ask for this, you know, this little 5-minute hello, get to know you. And so I said, well, I'll wait till after the annual meeting, let her and her team focus on that. So 2 Fridays ago, I'm sitting on my couch at 6:30 on Friday. You know, like everyone else in the world, we're still in the middle of all this insanity on Capitol Hill. So I'm looking at, and very much in the tradition of my father, I'm cussing at the TV. I'm literally cussing at something that's happening and being said on CNN. And my phone rings, but it's not a number I recognize. And as if you know anything about international global marketing, they've gotten real slick. They know how to tee up their internet dialing, so their call doesn't come from that +1 number anymore. It now comes from your area code. So 6:30 at night, TV's blasting, and I said, oh, I don't need to turn the TV down because this is one of those prank calls. And I hear this voice say, is this Stephen? And I'm like, yeah. And this is not Councilwoman, this is Brooke Pinto. And so I'm scrambling to cut down the phone and mute the TV and say hello. And I just have to tell you, thank you, because I have a joke I play with my career and my aging. I tell myself I'm so old that there are never going to be any more firsts in my work and in my career. And so just, you know, started young, been around the block a bunch of times. And so I make a note of cataloging any first that happens within the work, within the politics, within the career. And Councilwoman, I have to say that is the first time I have met a council person by getting a cold call on a Friday evening. So, and didn't say, this is Councilwoman Pinto, just said simply, this is Brooke Pinto. And I thought after we hung up the phone that night, I said, this is cool, she's cool, this is a great preview of coming attractions. So I want to thank you for your accessibility and your warmth to our membership, and just invite you to make any closing remarks that you would like to make.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for sharing that story. That's so funny. I couldn't tell the noise in the background at all, but thank you for taking my call and remembering that. I'm glad we were able to provide you with a first. But thank you so much for being here today and for engaging. I'm not sure where all these questions are coming in. I haven't been able to see them, but thank you for asking them and for your engagement and really for all of your work. Steve, of course, you're a fantastic president, but I know that all of the members here care so deeply about our community, and it does already and is going to make me a more effective council member. So keep going, keep reaching out to our office whenever we can be helpful. If you have ideas or questions, we are here to learn from you and partner with you. So thank you all so much. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure, and please view us as a resource. We want you to succeed wildly. And we know already that you get it. And we just want to be a resource to you in your pursuit of it. Thank you so very much, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Take care.